This show is for you if you desire healing, freedom, and wholeness. My goal is to help you live with more passion, love with more purpose, and lead an overcoming life. Well, today I have an incredible story to share with you. It's the story of Beautifully Broken. Our guest today is Randy Hartley, who's one of two fathers who began a healing journey when his daughter really turned his life upside down and yet led to freedom and wholeness as they also traveled to Rwanda together and found freedom in the midst of brokenness. So before you watch this interview, I just want to encourage you, stop by SueDetweiler.com and download 5 Steps of Grace. It's a journey guide to freedom. On Healing Rain today, I have Randy Hartley with me, and he has a new book coming out called Beautifully Broken. Welcome on Healing Rain, Randy.
Oh, thank you, Sue. Thank you so much for having me.
I love your story, and I am amazed how God uses our story to really encourage others. And I love it because the movie came out in 2018, but now a book is coming out. And really, it's a story of two families. And so, can you talk about, Randy, just how God began to get a hold of your heart and how your own healing journey began?
Sure. Well, there's no doubt. So Beautifully Broken is out. And I tell people all the time, if the title was broken, I'd want to hide it, but it is beautifully broken because our Savior can take those broken pieces and put us back together again. And so, as a background, I'm in suburban Nashville. Thought I was living the American dream, had the house, 3 kids, the dog, the job was going well. Thought I'd done everything a dad's supposed to do to provide for and protect their family. And then when my middle daughter hit her early and mid-teen years, her life got off track. And I was a dad trying to find and save a lost soul because she was doing all the things that you don't want your kids to do. Unfortunately, it's the drugs and the alcohol, and kind of culminated with her running away one weekend. And for 48 hours, we didn't know where she was. And I want to tell you, if you're a dad and you've ever driven around at 3 or 4 in the morning trying to find a 16-year-old daughter, that's a horrible spot.
Yeah.
But thankfully, that Sunday, I sent her one more text, and I don't know why, because she hadn't responded in forever. And I said, honey, please come home. I know you need help. Let mom and I help you. And so it gets me emotional. But within 30 seconds, she sent back and said, you're right. I do need help. I'm coming home. So we put her in a program to try to get to the core of what was going on. And about 3 weeks into it, we were invited out to meet her counselors like we've been doing through the week. But this time it was a little different. They handed us a letter. And it's a letter that you never want to have to read. But it basically said that mom and dad, I have to tell you, I was molested. She was molested when she was 12 years old at a public park in Brentwood, in our hometown. And the rest of that day is almost a blur. But I will tell you, as odd as it is, and as terrible as it was to get that news, it at least gave us a basis to build from. It gave us a starting point to explain what had been going on, because unfortunately that had been 4 years. And to me, one of the saddest part of the letters was not just that it happened, but she said, I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to disappoint you. And to think that my 12-year-old was trying to protect mom and I for something that was obviously not her doing or her fault.
Yeah.
But in that process, as a 12-year-old trying to process the physical and the emotional, ramifications of it all, she said later in her testimony, when she came home, she said, I guess that's it. I guess I'm a bad girl. And, you start, you believe that shame that it causes makes you want to believe all the lies. It keeps you in that dark, and you believe the evil that's saying you're of no value, you're no good, you're a bad girl. And when you view yourself that way, you treat yourself that way. And so that's the drugs and the alcohol and the rebellion, because
Yeah.
she viewed herself as worthless, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I mean,
I can really relate to your story, and I know there are many families that can relate to your story.
yeah,
And I was a young girl that was abused, and I didn't tell my parents. It
right,
it didn't come out till soon before my marriage, and so
yeah,
that healing that needs to happen,
right.
and often that is the case of hiding it.
Well, no doubt. That's one of the things I've learned. I've
Mhm.
become evangelical about, because, um, you don't
Mhm.
cure darkness with more darkness. You cure it
No.
with light, and you
No.
and Jesus is the light. And if you'll shine light on it, that's where you have a chance to build back from. And it's not an automatic. It's kind of like being an alcoholic and
Mhm.
admitting that you're an alcoholic. That doesn't solve the problem, but it gives you a
Mhm.
basis to build from. And so that's where our
It
family found
does.
ourselves in 2009. Our daughter had just, after, from age 12 to 16, dealing with it on her own and believing all the lies and the whispers and all these things, and treating herself in that worthless way. We
Yeah.
finally got to the root of the problem to give us something to build back from. And yet, even in
Yeah.
that building back process, it's not linear. It's not a straight line back to merry days.
Mm-mm.
It's two step forward, one step back. One of the
Mhm.
things that you find too is, in that healing process, the healing's not just the daughter who was molested, it's the
Mhm.
entire family. Because for 4 years, particularly for the last 2 years,
Mhm.
all of our emotional energy had gone into our daughter and trying to get things back on track. But we have other children, and my wife and I still had a marriage. And what you also find out is, when you spend
Mhm.
so much emotional energy one direction, you don't
Mhm.
realize that it starts to erode the other relationships.
Sure it
And,
does.
and so that
Yeah.
counseling that we went through, and it was fantastic counseling, and we were blessed to be able to go through what we did, was not just
Mhm.
with us and our daughter and her own, but it was me and my wife and the family. We all had repairing to do from that. And that's something I was unaware of, frankly,
Yeah.
at the time. I didn't think, no, I'm fine. What you find
Mhm.
out is, no, there's been erosion across that board. But
Yeah.
as we're walking through that, in those two steps forward, one step back, I came home from work one day and just exasperated by coming home to another day of a house in turmoil. And in my frustration, I'm flipping through the mail and I look, and there's a letter, and it's a Compassion International letter from Amahosa, the girl that had been Andrea's correspondent, girl that she sponsored for 10 years.
Mm.
And it just hit me, and I don't even know why. I tell people all the time, God knows why. But I got that letter and I
Mhm.
thought, that's it. I'm taking Andrea to Rwanda. And I say, God knows why. Well, God knew why.
Mhm.
My reasoning was wrong, but no matter how naive and poor my reasoning was, God knew it was a tool to use. Because my thought was, if I take her to Rwanda and she can just see how the other half of the world lives, she'll begin to appreciate more what she has here. And frankly, that was a
Mhm.
poor way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But God didn't care. He said, I don't care what your logic is.
Mhm.
I know what I'm going to do with this trip. You don't yet know. So I
Mhm.
decided, okay, that's it. We're going to go to Rwanda. How do I get there? What do I do? How can I make this work? And it just so happened that God had
Mhm.
placed in our lives a refugee family from Rwanda, William and Abraham Wazerwa and their family, who had become our neighbors. They had escaped the genocide. William had been a supervisor with the Rwanda National Coffee Company. They left and became our neighbors. I knew a little bit about Rwanda. I didn't know much about their personal story, but I got to know them because their youngest son was friends with my son, and I got to know him through Cub Scouts. I knew he had started a ministry serving other refugees, and I supported him. But nevertheless, I called him and said, William, I've got to take my daughter to Rwanda. How do I get there? How can we make this happen? Can you help me? And it just so happened that that summer, his wife was leading a mission trip back to Rwanda. This would
Mhm.
be 15 years after the genocide, and it was her first trip back. So I said, I'd love to pay your wife's way if she can be the guide for Andrew and I to go back to Rwanda to meet Amahosa. And as I say, I don't know why I did it, but I also told my daughter, you have to pay for the trip. And she said, well, how am I going to do that? And I said, well, the Mazeras have a refugee ministry. I want you to go serve every day at their refugee ministry, and that's how you're going to pay it.
Mhm.
Again, thinking if she go meet the people that's similar to who we might meet, um, I thought that was it. Familiarize yourself with what we might be seeing. But again, God knew what the real purpose was, because I tell people all the time, the first day my daughter went to volunteer, she went because I made her. And the next 1,000 days was because she wanted to.
Yeah.
And she said later that her healing began when she began volunteering, because
Yeah.
mom and I had poured every ounce of love we can into to try to
Mhm.
repair it. But I think in the mind of a 16-year-old, that's what you're supposed to say. And it's like water through a sieve. But she would later say that when she started volunteering, and these refugee children that she was tutoring would come up to her every day and say, Miss Andrew, we love you. Miss Andrew, we're glad you're here. She
Yeah.
said, that's when I realized I have worth. I have something to give.
Yeah.
And so, um, man, I really believe in that. I think helping others leads to that
Mhm.
healing. And I really believe helping others can be that glue that helps to
Yeah.
put those broken pieces back together, because it
I
allows us to
yeah,
think
I
outside
agree.
ourselves. Yeah.
And it's something how when we begin to see more broadly, as well as to see from a global perspective. I
Yes.
really believe that it's important to get a perspective of what's happening in the world. So when we adopted our two sons from Brazil, all of our other six, a total of six, four daughters went with us. And that aspect of they had been born drug addicted. So I had not known the world that you're talking about, but delving into the life of a 12 and an 8-year old and, being orphaned and on the streets. And
Right.
it does an education, but it also changes you as a person.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
sure that's what happened when you headed to Rwanda.
Oh, well, that's just it. It really set our mind, and not knowing the true impact it would have, but that volunteering got that mindset going, and it made her start thinking,
Hmm.
I have value, I have something to give. So that led up to us going to Rwanda, and we went with the Briley and Muzerwa. I knew very little of their story, and truthfully, it's probably a good thing I didn't know, because if I'd known their whole story, I wouldn't have had the gumption to ask them to lead us. But it was their
Right.
first trip back. And I will tell you, on our first day in Rwanda, Briley hadn't been back for 15 years, and she'd worked in the Presbyterian church there and was visiting friends, and we were tagging along. And that first night when we were going across Kigali, she had our driver turn here, turn there. We ended up down this residential alley, and we stopped in front of a house. And she said, that's it. That's the house that William and I lived in with our kids. And then she really got into almost a trance, and she said, that's the ditch that they lined us up in the night the militia came. And they were holding machetes to our heads, accusing us of having children in the resistance. And William was negotiating, saying, no, our oldest is a 12-year-old daughter. They're not. But she said, it was getting rough, and all of a sudden a gunshot rang out, and a militiaman fell over, and they ran up the hill, and they started exchanging gunfire. She said, I don't know how long we lay there, because how do you count minutes when you're waiting to die? But eventually William got us up, and we went back in the house, and we prayed all night, and we left the next day. And I've never been back here until this moment. Oh
Wow.
my goodness. You talk about making just the hair on my arm stand up. It was just like, this is going to be an incredible journey. And I began to realize how privileged Andrew and I were to be going through this journey with somebody who was
Mhm.
on a journey of her own, and their own journey of healing and so forth. But it culminated with us going out to Murumbi, the little town that our girl was
Mhm.
from. We took the 3 hour at the end of a week in Kigali. We took a 1 hour ride out to Murumbi, and meeting at the Compassion International program site. And came this beautiful young lady who we had seen pictures for 10 years.
Mhm.
Um, it was like a little angel walking in the doorway. It really was. And Andrew and her immediately bonded, and we loaded up into the SUV, and we drove another couple miles out to her home. And I'd always been told that her father had been in jail the whole time we'd been supporting her. So I was surprised when we got there, when her family came out, her dad came out. I thought, well, Compassion got that wrong. Well, as we sat in the house and exchanged
Mm.
pleasantries, her dad started speaking. And her dad said, I had to go to jail in 1994. That would have been the year of the genocide. He said, I had to go to jail in 1994 when my husband was just 2 years old. And I thought to myself, how is God going to take care of my family? And I prayed, God, how is this going to work? And he looked at me, he goes, God sent me you. He said, I need to thank you for being the father to my family for the last 10 years when I
Mhm.
couldn't be here. He had just gotten out of jail less than a month before us getting there. And Sue, I got to tell you, here I am, a dad wandering the back hills of Rwanda, wondering why I'm even here, thinking that I have really screwed up, and finding out that when my family was falling apart, we were holding his family together. And he went on to say, he said, we thought we weren't going to have children. And they were losing faith because they were afraid they're going to be barren. And he said, God finally gave us a daughter. And in Rwanda, you don't name your children until after birth, and they're normally named some sort of aspiration or attribute. But he said, when our daughter was born, we named her Amahosa because Amahosa means the Redeemer.
Wow.
And I thought, I could have been wandering the back hills of Rwanda looking for the tall or the beautiful or the bright smile or the funny, but of course not.
Mm.
10 years earlier, God had planted a seed at an Amy Grant concert that we brought home and
Mhm.
filled out to sponsor children. My daughter randomly picked a girl who happened to be from Rwanda. And as we wandered the back hills to find her, we were searching for the Redeemer. And that's what we found.
Yeah.
It was just transformational. When we came back, the only regret I had was it made a supreme impact on me and my daughter. And I realized that the trip wasn't just
Mhm.
for her, it was for me and it was for our whole family. And when she came back, she quit cheerleading. She volunteered at Legacy Mission 4 days a week. She got straight A's. She went on to college and got an honors college degree in international studies, learned Swahili, and then moved back to
Wow.
Kenya and has done mission work for almost 8 years.
Is she in Kenya right now? I've been there
Well,
twice
it's
recently. Yeah.
ironically enough, she literally just got home this past Sunday. So after living there
Ah.
for 8 years, COVID has kind of made it much more difficult to do what she was doing.
Yeah, I
And so she feels
understand.
she's coming home. She'd been there and would be home maybe 2 months a year. Now she plans to be here about 10 months and maybe there 2 months a year. So she just now is back
Mhm.
home. But I
Well,
tell people,
tell her I'm headed there in September again. So
oh, well, there you go. Well,
maybe
good.
there's a way we can connect when we're
Absolutely.
there. We
There you
work
go.
in like 4 of the slum areas, and you're
Yes.
right. It's very desperate right now.
Right.
But I'm not surprised that this transformational healing
Yes.
led to her having really a global perspective of
Right.
making a difference in the world.
Well, I will tell you, she led all the 3 summers that she was in college. She led a mission trip back to her college friends back to Rwanda each time. And every time
Mhm.
something would happen on the trip that was just God sent.
Yeah.
Um, and so I do believe in missions too. Not that you have to go to Africa, you can go across the street or across town. But I think God prepares you in mission trips. He prepares your heart. He makes you a little bit
Mhm.
vulnerable, whether
Yeah.
you're going, as I say, across town or across the world. And I think in that moment of vulnerability,
Mhm.
that's fertile soil for hearing the Lord and the things that He
Mhm.
wants you to hear and to see. Um, but as transformational as that trip was, the only regret is our whole family hadn't gone and the Mazzaro family hadn't gone in total. And thankfully, 2 years later, we went back with their whole family and our whole family as part of a mission trip with Legacy Mission Village. That's the not-for-profit that serves the refugees. And in this trip back, we went with the Mazzaros and we went to William's home village of Ramera. He hadn't been there in 17 years. And he went to visit the gravesite of his mom and his aunts and his sisters. He knew they had obviously died in the genocide, but didn't know. In fact, almost his entire family was wiped out in the genocide,
Wow.
but didn't know much of the facts. And after visiting the gravesite, we stayed up. The rest of the mission group stayed up by the cars as they walked down the field to it and came back up. And it turned out that William was the driver with my whole family in it heading back, and we were the last of about a 5-car caravan. And not a quarter mile from where we left the gravesite, as we're turning the corner, for the first time William's been there in 17 years, he looks up and he sees an old lady coming out of a mud hut and says, "That's my mom's best friend." And he stops the
Wow.
car and he goes out and he talks to her. And they have about a 10-minute conversation. I could tell there was something going on. It was started with pleasantries, but got deeper. He got back in the car and his mind was a million miles away. And that night at our Bible study, he said, when we left the gravesite, we ran into my mom's best friend. And she told me that my aunt was culpable in my mother's death. Now, to fill in the blanks, William's family had been Tutsi. his grandfather had adopted a little orphan girl who happened to be Hutu. That was William's aunt. So she was an adopted
Oh.
aunt. Flash forward to 1994,
Oh.
that's a circumstance. So William says, I need to learn more about this. So he said, I want you to pray for me. I'm going to go visit my aunt tomorrow and see if I can learn more about my mother's death. Well, needless to say, we prayed, and that day they left, and we worked on painting a church and doing the things you do on a mission trip. And at Bible study that night, they came back home. And I ran into Briley right outside of the Bible study. And I said, how was it? She said, oh, it's very emotional, but powerful. And again, at the end of the Bible study, William began to speak. And he said, I went to see my adopted aunt. And we exchanged some pleasantries, and she had some family come over, and we went in the house. And after talking a little bit about old times, I asked her to tell me what happened to my mom. And she said, well, you're not going to want to hear it. Because no, I need to know the truth. That would be a gift to me. And the aunt told me that after about a week to 10 days of holding out, she went over to my mom's house where the mom and sisters and William's sisters and aunts were hiding, and said, look, you need to come over to my hut. I'm Hutu. They won't be looking for me. You're out of food and water. I can help. But it was a setup. And as she led him back to her house, William's cousins, that aunt's sons, murdered the family. And then he said, after I heard this, I realized I needed to do something. And he looked over, and in all those mud huts, there's no running water. So he saw a wash basin with the washstand. And he took the basin and the water, and he said, I want to wash your feet. I want to forgive you, and I want to wash your feet. And he knelt in front of her, and he washed her feet. Because he said, I want you to see that what I'm saying is genuine. And you're the only living person alive that knew me as a boy. We need to repair our relationship. We need to repair our relationship with God, and the country needs to be repaired. You can imagine hearing this at a Bible study in Rwanda. There was not a dry eye in the house. And to take the story even further, 2 years later, we're back on another mission trip, and William visits his aunts again and came back to our Bible study and told another story. And let me tell you, if you get to hear him talk at a Bible study, you need to, because it's unbelievable. But he came back and he said, I visited my aunt today because we do have a relationship now. And she asked me, she said, do you remember what I promised you after you washed my feet 2 years ago? And William said, I told her, I don't remember. She goes, I told you that I hadn't been to church since 1994 because I felt unworthy after what had happened. But after you wash my feet, I promise you I would go to church every Sunday. And I've not missed a Sunday for the last 2 years. And then she said, my daughter-in-law, who was here when you washed my feet, was a Muslim. And after you did that, she asked, what would make a man do that? What would allow a man to hear what happened and wash your feet? And Dan said, I told her, well, come with me to church and find out. And so the daughter-in-law started going with her to church and converted to Christianity. And that's when William told the Bible study, that's why we forgive, because forgiving saves souls. And what greater mission do we have in life than to save souls? So that's our book, Beautifully Broken, in a nutshell, is so many of these powerful stories of people that were broken, families that were broken through trauma of not their own making, whether it was my daughter and her being molested, whether it was William and having to run and escape the genocide, whether it was poor Alma Hosa and her family, whose dad had been sent to jail for 15 years. And yet it wasn't lost on me. And this is when I thought I need to write this stuff down, because think of the odds that me as a financial planner in suburban Nashville would lean on a refugee from Rwanda who became my neighbor to lead me back into Rwanda to meet a little girl whose father had been a genocide perpetrator. And yet God was able to take the threads of these three lives and weave them together in the way that only he can in this divine tapestry that made us all whole again. And that's all that's my will in doing what we've done here, is to show people that so often, Sue, we get stuck in these dark places and we think that's the end. And what we don't realize is that's just a chapter. We might have a dark chapter. We might be broken in that chapter, but God's not through writing the book. That if we'll lean on him, he will show us the way out. Take Joseph, who's in a pit and buried and sold into slavery. God loves to take people who are in those darkest, deepest places and say, lean on me, and I'll show how I can make something out of your story. And in fact, I would say that those broken people become the best messengers, because I know from my daughter's perspective, if you want to talk to people who've been abused, no one's in a more authoritative place to talk about than someone who's been through that experience and can help you in that. If you're in drug addiction, an ex-addict who's made it out, who said you're not a victim, that's a chapter, but victory can be the end of your book. It empowers you. And Briley has this saying that I love. She said, God
Yeah.
wastes no pain if you let that pain become your passion. And so even the Mazzara family, who escaped the genocide and came here, they've now set up this ministry that served over 12,000 refugees, because when William got here, he met some boys from the Lost Boys of Sudan. And he
Right.
thought, my family survived and I'm here as a father, but imagine those were my kids. Who would take care of them? And so he began serving first 3, then 15, then eventually 150 Lost
Yeah.
Boys of Sudan. And it just expanded from there. And that really is his calling. And my daughter, who's moved to Africa, I think she would say she ended up where she was supposed to be. I'm not saying that God wanted her to be molested. I don't think God wanted the Mazzara's family to be slaughtered. But, our God doesn't promise that we won't fall into hard times. But what my God promises is if you do, I'm here for you. You can lean on me. And in fact, I'll carry you when you need to be carried. And if you'll do that, it can be there's that better day. And so, again, I go back to our title, Beautifully Broken. If the title of the book was broken, I'd want to hide it. But especially in this day and age, we all hide our scars. And I think especially with social media, because on social media, everyone's on a great vacation. Everyone's grandchild's the best baseball player on the team. All kids have straight A's. And I think half the time we look at it and go, man, what am I? And yet what I'm reminded of is that when our Savior, Jesus, rose from the resurrection and he met his disciples, what's the first thing he did just about? Is he showed them his hands. He showed them his scars, not to remind them of the pain he'd been through, but to remind them of his victory over it. And so the scars that end up in our book, Beautifully Broken, aren't there to make anyone feel sorry for us, remind them of the pain that we've gone through, the Mazzara family. It's to remind them that there is a victory over it, that yes, there is that painful and powerful parts of the movie, but that's, or in the book, but that's what makes the victory over it even that much more sweet. And
Yes, it is.
that's my heart in the book.
Yeah. And Healing Rain listeners, I know all of you in different places of your lives, you have been beautifully broken different times. And, it is the broken pieces of a stained glass window that
Amen.
when the light of Jesus comes through it, the
Yes.
glory, the magnificence of the beauty of the colors that tell a story of his redemption, that's part of what the beauty is. And so your whole family has been beautifully broken.
Well, no question. It's a family affair. It was the family that got pulled into the darkness, and it's the whole family that's been pulled out through the light. And I mean, it is a process, but I think people, though, need to be reminded that that dark spot is a chapter. It's not the final verse. And so I like to say that our family's mess has become my message. And that's my passion now. I'm a full-time financial planner. That's what I've done for 39 years. But I do feel that God really revealed this story to me, that I happened to be with the Mazzaras when we stopped at their house and I learned the story of what happened. I happened to be there when William turned the corner and the lady came out from the hut, and happened to be in those Bible studies, and many more stories like that in our book. That literally one day I thought, Lord, am I supposed to be taking notes? And I told a friend about it, and the friend said, yes, take notes. And it evolved into a documentary we did in 2014 that won some national awards, and it gave me the gumption to make a movie, Beautifully Broken. And it's not like it's been easy, and it takes a lot of effort. But my richest reward comes when, in a church environment, for example, we've shown the movie, and I have 75-year-olds who at the end of the movie come up and give me a hug and cry on my shoulder and say, I was molested and I never told anyone. And I wish I could have had that conversation. And I said, it's not too late. You can have that conversation. we showed it
Mhm.
to college students one day, and at the end, I began to spot him. You could tell the person who's lingering in the back, and this young college age girl was lingering in the back. And after the movie, she came up to me and she said, "Randy," she said,
Mhm.
"I suffer from depression, and some days are way worse than others. And today was a really bad day. I don't even know why I wandered in here tonight, but that
Mhm.
story is the best thing to happen to me in
Hmm.
a really long time." And I
Yeah.
asked if I could hug her, and she said, "Yeah." And I gave her a hug, and then she looked at me and said, "Thanks. I'm going to go call my dad." I don't know what that conversation might have been, but I like to think that our story gave her that little nudge to get out of that holding spot of darkness and try to move her a bit towards what God has in store for her. Because I
Mhm.
think sometimes we give up hope because we pray and we don't see results in a week or a day. But Moses wandered for 40 years. I mean, our God requires us to be a patient God because he comes through, I think, when the time is right under his time and not our time.
Yeah.
Um, so I hope there's some people
Yeah.
who might see the movie or read our book that's coming out in this month. And, if they're not broken, I think it can be a very inspirational and entertaining story of amazement of how God can take these three families, really, not just our family, the Mazzaro family, but Amahosa and her family. And it makes for a great story. But for those who do happen to be in a spot that they're looking for some hope and they're about feel like they're running on empty, I hope this fills their tank to say you can make it until God is ready to show his plan for you. And that's really why I did the book. I didn't need to write a book. I needed to write this book because I've got a career, I've got a family, and things are going well. But I have just felt called to share this part of it, to
Mhm.
try to truly nudge some people along, to let them see there is light, and
Mhm.
that day will come.
Well, thank you so much just for your journey of wholeness and your healing journey and allowing the light to shine through transparently your story and encourage others. Thank you
Well,
for
thank you,
that.
sir. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it, and hope our goal is met at least by one or two people anyway.
And Healing Rain listeners, I know as you've been listening, you may have thought of places that you personally have experienced brokenness. If you have experienced sexual brokenness and you've not talked about it, um, in our show notes, we're putting some resources down that you can get help. Just know you don't have to carry that secret, that you can begin to just get healing on your own. Or maybe you're a parent and you've struggled with your kids' addictions and you're not sure how to get help for your children, but also yourself. Just know there's some notes there too. Or you could be a family and you're listening and you're realizing that Compassion International helps put you in touch with children that you can adopt. Just know that making a, a change in the sense of even your economic blessing and sharing it in the world makes such a difference. So we want to encourage you wherever you are on your healing journey that you too can be beautifully broken and beautifully redeemed.
Yeah. Amen to that, Sue. That was a great summary, and I appreciate what you do, and I hope your listeners appreciate you as well.
Thank you.